well, welcome everyone. This is going to be our 6th meeting with our Meet the Expert series. And this time we're going to be learning about reusing timber. And we're going to be hearing from Adam Corneil, who's here to talk about his business, Unbuilders. And it's really timely because obviously old growth timber is on our minds a lot at the moment in BC, and it's in the news most days. And For Our Kids group have been working really hard to try and protect the little bit of old growth that we've got left from being logged. So it's just a really timely and hopefully quite encouraging and uplifting talk to think about how we can ensure that we're maximising the life out of the timber that's already been logged and used in construction. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So we are recording tonight's session already, so we can share the video afterwards. So if anybody doesn't want to be on video, then just switch your video off. And if you know of anybody that wants to watch this, we'll send you around the link in a couple of days. And just a reminder to keep yourself on mute throughout the talk. We'll do questions later, but just so we can reduce background noise, if you're not talking, if you could keep yourself on mute throughout the session, that'd be great. Okay, so just to begin with, I want to acknowledge that the land on which we're gathered is the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the shared, unceded traditional territories of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And we're grateful for the opportunity to live and learn on this traditional territory. So thanks for joining us this evening. For those of you who are new here, welcome, and a little bit about For Our Kids. So For Our Kids is a national organisation, a not-for-profit. It's a network of parents and grandparents across Canada who are connecting to create a better world for our kids and grandkids. And we're run almost entirely by volunteers, and each of the local chapters are self-organised and do what they feel is the most helpful in their region to address climate change. So since November last year, our North Shore group has been doing this Meet the Expert series, so we can learn a bit more about environmental topics and connect with local experts, and most importantly, to understand what we can do to help with some of these bigger campaigns. So at the end, we're going to tell you a bit more about the other campaigns that we've been working on and how you can be involved. And I'll put all our contact details in the chat later on, just so you can stay in touch with us. So currently our North Shore team, we've got a team of 6. So we've got most of us, I think everyone's here tonight. We've got Marion and Josh and Celine and Julia and Jill and myself. And we've been meeting every week to learn more about climate change and then just to plan activities like this one. So we've been working together and taking action on lots of different issues. And then we do things like meet with MLAs, send emails to MLAs, publish op-eds. We've painted banners, we've done social media, we've written formal submissions to government. So if any of that kind of sparks your interest, then please do get in touch, and everyone's very welcome to join us. Okay, so about tonight, there's going to be 2 parts to this meeting. So firstly, I'll introduce our guest speaker, Adam, and we'll get to hear about his story of Unbuilders. And then we'll open it up to questions and any comments from all of you. And we'll keep an eye on the chat for your questions. So you can type a question into the chat, or if you feel like you want to ask something directly, you can just put your hand up. There's a little reaction button at the bottom of your Zoom panel, and you can stick a little hand up, and then you can ask something live if you want to. And then at the end, as I said, we'll give you a quick update on all the other campaigns that we're working on. Okay, so I'm really pleased now to be able to introduce our speaker for the evening, Adam Corneil. And thanks so much, Adam, for joining us this evening.
My pleasure.
So Adam is a builder and an entrepreneur with an extensive background in passive house construction and deconstruction and reclaimed wood use. And whilst building homes, Adam saw that there was a big need for a change in the demolition industry, and so began his journey to start Unbuilders. He flipped his first house age 16, impressive. And then fast forward to 2018, he founded Unbuilders, and some of you may have seen him getting a clean sweep on Dragon's Den. He's a North Shore guy, I think, and passionate about family and mountain sports, and also a parent of a small boy who is hopefully still asleep. So welcome, Adam, and thank you so much for talking this evening. And yeah, off you go.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am in the North Shore. I'm in Lynn Valley.
Okay.
Let me get this up. Okay. All right. So, yeah, my pleasure to be here. Obviously, I am I love speaking and hopefully influencing and gaining support for the movement that we're trying to lead to a more sustainable future. And so I am the founder and CEO of both Unbuilders and Heritage Lumber. So we have two companies under one umbrella. And I will explain why we have two companies. And so we are presenting a new future for old buildings when they either come to the end of their life or they're going to be redeveloped, hopefully for density. We offer a sustainable way to take those buildings down. So Lauren already did a pretty extensive introduction, so I don't need to spend much time here. But on top of what she touched on, I do a lot of work with politicians. I'm trying to push the District of North Vancouver to move in this direction, and they've been very receptive. And so I've worked quite heavily with the City of Vancouver and the City of Victoria, and I'm doing a lot of work with other municipalities now and the provincial government in BC. And I'm also a demolition committee member of the National Zero Waste Council. So we meet once a month and just speak about construction waste across the country. And so we launched Unbuilders in 2018 after I was deconstructing houses under my contracting company, my former contracting company, since 2014. And then we launched Heritage Lumber just last year, really only about 6 months ago. Looking at what the problem is in the industry, which is really what made me start to shift my focus from building to unbuilding. So construction is the largest contributor to solid waste in our country. So more solid waste goes to our landfill from construction than any other industry, which I think is not very well known. About 40% of our solid waste, which translates into about 4 million tons a year. And when that goes to landfill and decomposes, it creates about 20 million tons of CO2. So it's a massive contributor to climate change. And when you break down that waste, what is it that's going to the landfill? Over a third of it, about 37% of it is lumber, so 1.5 million tons. And 100% of that lumber is recoverable. It's either salvageable or at least recyclable. So it should never hit the landfill. And then when you break down that lumber, a large portion of it, particularly in the West, is old growth lumber. And so it's extremely valuable. It's a rare resource, and there is no excuse for why that should ever go to the landfill. And I'll dive into that a little bit in a few slides. So in general, this is a monster problem in our country. And this is what your classic demolition looks like. So building fully intact. Obviously this house, there's nothing wrong with the house, but it's not the right layout for the customer, or they're going to build for density or for whatever reason. We're certainly not out there promoting tearing down buildings, in particular heritage buildings, but we want to make sure that if they're going to come down, we can give them an alternative to this process. So you can see everything is still intact, windows, doors, half the time the appliances are still in there. And it's just chewed apart and put in a bin and taken to the landfill where it is going to decompose. Our solution is a circular solution. So circular economy is pretty hot topic the last few years. And we're really a circular economy within one group of companies. So we have a fantastic partnership with Habitat for Humanity. And so on the one side, Unbuilders deconstructs buildings, and Heritage Lumber brokers the reclaimed wood, and the other materials are all donated to Habitat for Humanity. And that generates a tax receipt for the homeowner. So it's a way for us to give some sort of financial incentive to deconstruct. And it also means that the proceeds that Habitat sells through their store, the proceeds go to build affordable housing. So in hiring Unbuilders and deconstructing, you're actually contributing to the construction of affordable housing. Unbuilders is the first and still really the only dedicated deconstruction company in the country, in particular in the residential commercial sector. There's other barn deconstruction companies in the prairies, but we're the only ones operating really in the residential and commercial sector. We diverted 2,500 tons last year. We'll do well over double that this year. And on average, we divert about 95% of the building from landfill. And we've hit over 99% on some residential projects. So less than 1% of the materials from the house ended up at the landfill. And really, if we had infinite time, there's hardly anything in these old buildings that needs to go to the landfill. So that 99% number is not unrealistic, but we're about 95% based on time. Looking at what the deconstruction process looks like in contrast to demolition, at this point in the project, we'd already stripped out the interior. We'd removed the windows and doors, salvaged those and donated them. And then we really reverse engineer the building, working from the top down, layer by layer, peeling it back, separating the materials on site so that they go to the correct either salvage location or recycling facility. And in the end, we're left with very little waste. So you can see this project is about 2 years old. We're much cleaner than we are in this video, but this is the typical hand deconstruction process. I've got another video and a few slides that shows when we use cranes to speed up the process. Now, the big hurdles that we are challenged with, and this is really what has dissuaded, I think, a lot of demolition companies to go this direction, and also other entrepreneurs to maybe jump in or at least survive in this industry, because it has not been easy, to say the least. But there's 4 major hurdles that really are stacked against deconstruction at the moment. So the first one is cost. It costs more to deconstruct. We're 6 people typically in a crew, and we'll be on a job anywhere, roughly about a month, including the soft strip out, that initial phase where you take out the drywall and insulation. So that costs more than a 1 machine operator and the machine running for a few days. But that's where our donation model comes into play. And we help battle that financial cost, the added cost, by the donation tax receipt, or on some buildings, in particular the commercial buildings that we do, we actually acquire the materials. So we'll buy the building and just discount our service from that acquisition, which typically puts us cost competitive to demolition. Time is the other big one. In residential, we've gotten very fast. So we do add probably on average about 2 weeks to a residential project, and I'd say about a month to a commercial project. And so that's where we're really working with policymakers, because we don't think that the builder or developer should be penalized to deconstruct. We think that they should get their permits early, and it should be an incentive to deconstruct. The other big hurdle is the outlets. So we're very fortunate in Vancouver. We're located on eco-waste property, who's a major recycler. They're also a landfill, but they're over time becoming more and more of a recycling outlet. And we have all the infrastructure in the Lower Mainland for almost all the materials, which is fantastic. It's really conducive for deconstruction to happen. And then the last big thing is the policy. And so aside from Vancouver and now Victoria, or soon to be Victoria, the policy is all stacked in the favor of demolition at the moment. So we really need to flip that script to move towards a sustainable future. And so the first or the second hurdle, the time hurdle, we've been evolving our service to try to figure out how can we do this faster. And so this is a house that we did in October. We did the entire frame with a crane. And this process would typically take us about 3 weeks by hand, and we did it with a crane in about a day and a half. And so we cut 2.5 weeks off of our schedule. We shipped those panels back to our yard at Eco Waste, and then we dismantled them on the ground. So it still took us 3 weeks. It's just we were only on site for two days. So we pushed that labor to offsite. Not only is it better for the builder and the homeowner, but it's also safer for our crew, because now we're doing a lot of the deconstruction on the ground in this controlled environment. So a big part of our success to date has been just the sheer volume of partnerships that we've created and the community that's been built around us and around deconstruction and material reuse in the areas that we operate. And so it really does take a village to change the industry, to do anything big. We couldn't do it if it wasn't for all these partnerships. So we're very grateful for everyone that's been involved, and it's why I love doing presentations like tonight. You know, this is to an audience of my neighbors, really, being in North Vancouver, and the more people that are aware of, number one, the huge problem of construction waste and this solution that we offer, the better we are, and the easier and quicker we'll be able to move the dial towards deconstruction. So we've got these great partnerships with our charities, Habitat for Humanity and the Reuse People. The Reuse People really invented the donation model in the US 25 years ago, but they don't have a store here at the moment. So most of our materials end up at Habitat. And then we have a vast network of builders and developers, mostly from my past building career. And then that's built upon over the last 5 years. Van City has been incredible for us. I don't think we'd still be in business if it wasn't for Van City. They've really helped us out in some hard times. So yeah, an amazing organization there. And then government and academia, we do a lot of work with both of those sectors, again, to just really educate people on how big of a problem this is and how quickly we need to move towards this alternative. Diving into the old growth lumber that we're recovering, and as Lorna said, this is really the timing is quite perfect because of the logging, or the scheduled logging in Fairy Creek, and just how controversial that is at the moment. And we're sort of smack dab in the middle of that controversy. We've been getting chastised by forestry workers and loggers on our social media the last week, which has been really interesting for me. And trying to decipher from what the industry facts are versus what the facts are from the environmental side, which we obviously tend to lean towards. And it's a classic case of two completely separate sets of data, completely different facts. And so it's been an interesting week for me to try to really dive into the industry side to see what their facts are and you know what the truth is. And unfortunately, I think the industry is really sugarcoating their facts, but they said, for one thing, they claim that the entire North Shore of Vancouver and West Vancouver is still old growth, and I know for a fact that that's completely false. I hike these forests almost daily, and there's hardly any left. So yeah, it's a tough position, because we're very grateful for the forestry industry, which literally built this entire province and this entire area. So we need our forestry sector. We need it to be healthy and sustainable, but we really need to stop logging the old growth that we have left, because of the tall trees, it's only about, it is under 3%. So the facts from the industry include like bogs and high alpine old growth, and they claim that there's about 30% remaining, but it's not true. And so the lumber that we recover, really all of our old buildings right up into the 1970s were built with old growth lumber. So when you peel back the layers of our old homes and our old buildings, even the 2x4s, if your house is 1970 or older, that typically came from old growth lumber, which is extremely tight grain. It came from these massive old trees, which on the North Shore, we're all well aware, because we get to see all the beautiful big tree stumps. And this is a scarce resource. So the old growth that is still unfortunately logged does not go into dimensional lumber. It's typically exported as logs. So really the only place to get old growth dimensional lumber is locked behind the walls of our buildings. So it's crucial that we deconstruct and recover it. And even though Vancouver is one of the youngest major cities in the world, it was built with ancient trees. And so when you dive into what the materials are that built this entire province, that they go back thousands of years in some cases. So it's not just a raw material, it's not just wood, it is really a piece of our history, and it's really a piece of the legacy of the land beneath our feet. The First Nations stewarded these lands for thousands, tens of thousands of years, and they only cut very selective trees. And it's really crucial that we can recover this wood and keep it in the supply chain. And reclaimed wood is 12 times, it has 12 times less embodied carbon than wood. So it is the greenest building material on the planet. If you want to build the most sustainable building possible, then you need to build that with reclaimed wood. There's limitless uses for reclaimed wood. Really, anywhere you're going to put a wood product, it could be reclaimed. And in my prior contracting days, we were doing this on a small scale. So all of our projects, we would deconstruct and we would process that material into products for the finishes. So these are just 3 different projects from my past and examples of it. And it doesn't have to be the classic kind of rustic look that you see in the middle. I've got some larger pictures. So this is sort of what people typically think of when they hear reclaimed wood, which has its own aesthetic. It's sort of trended out right now, but you can really process the material to be of any finish. So you can do it quite modern, like this floor is here. We've done whitewash and gray wash and things to make it really in line with what the current modern design sense is. So again, if you want to be sustainable and you're going to put wood products in, whether it's baseboards, casing, or flooring, we really recommend that you try to do it with reclaimed wood and reduce your carbon footprint on the project. Another layer of our service, or of deconstruction in general, as you start to peel back the layers of these buildings, there's a lot of stories and history locked behind the walls. So I've got a few that I'll talk about. This house here was a house in Fort Langley. And when we started deconstructing it, the BC assessment said it was from 1944. So we were expecting sort of our standard lumber from that era. But as we got down to the main floor joists on it, my team called me in to say, you know, we've uncovered something different here. And I came out, and it was actually the original farmhouse of Fort Langley that this house was built over top of. So we recovered lumber. It was like about 3 inches thick, milled probably in the 1850s, roughly. And we looked at historical photos, and sure enough, the fort was there, a church was there, and this one farmhouse. And we still have that wood set aside, but we uncovered probably the oldest lumber still in the Fraser Valley that was milled back at that time. And had that house been demolished, that would have never been discovered. This is a project, not a very good picture, but from Vancouver, which we just completed in January. It was called Turner's Dairy. It was a 1913 warehouse, and it was the main dairy distribution of all of Vancouver. So it's right in Mount Pleasant. You wouldn't even know that that building was there. But this is where the milkmen would fill up their trucks and then distribute milk throughout Vancouver. Again, so we were brought in by the developer. This is a really great development. They're retaining about half the lumber and repurposing it back into all the condos that they're building on the site. The other half of the lumber we acquired, and we're selling it. But again, this is just beautiful historical lumber from our city, and we're just very happy that the developer went this direction. And now it's going to be, for those new homeowners that are going to live in these condos, their whole ceiling is going to be built with this wood, and they're going to have this story that's going to last so long as the building lasts. And the last one I'll talk about is this barn that we did in Chilliwack last year. It was from 1889. And so this was what the building looked like when we came to site. It was blown apart in a windstorm. It was about to fall over. So the owner called us in and was really adamant about us salvaging the material. And this is just beautiful barn board. And the main beams across the top, you can see a couple of them. I think they were about 80 feet long, single pieces of timber. So it was like a single tree all the way across. And if this was built in 1889, the center beam was about 60 feet up in the air. So we're sitting there going, how the hell did they get that up there? They would have done it all with pulleys and horses. And yeah, just amazing to peel back the layers and be able to recover this material. There's a lot of different positive impacts that come to deconstruction. The environmental ones I've already touched upon. The last point I will say is just that deconstruction really contributes or stops contributing to the overflowing landfills. And so in Vancouver, and the landfill in Delta, the main one for the region, is scheduled to be full 12 years ahead of schedule. So by 2028, they're going to have to expand it unless we start deconstructing really quickly, which means they're going to have to occupy extremely valuable land in Delta just to add to our growing pile of garbage. In Victoria, if they continue at the pace that we're bringing materials to the landfills, they literally will have to clear cut a forest to expand their landfill. So we need to really curb our waste quickly. The social impacts from deconstruction, the one we already talked about was the partnership with Habitat for Humanity and how they build affordable housing with the proceeds of the used building materials. The other is when we are doing a project in a community, our crew really becomes entrenched in that community, and it's really been fascinating to see. Typically, when we get to site, especially if the building is pre-1930, I would say most of the community members are rather upset that it's coming down. I think demolition, for the most part, is a really negative experience in a community, and for good reason. A lot of these buildings are completely structurally fine. They're coming down because people don't like the layout, or they're going to densify. But a lot of the time, it's just they don't like the house. And again, we are not out there saying let's tear down all our heritage homes. We want to see more preservation. We work with heritage societies. We work with Nickel Brothers who move houses if we can avoid taking them apart. But once that decision is made that building's coming down, we step in to make sure that we at least get the materials and recover them. So in a community, when we see that negative reaction, by day 2, we have most of the community coming by, they're supporting us, they get really excited about our service, and it turns a really negative experience into a really positive one. And it can actually bring a community together in some cases. So especially the larger projects like that Turner Dairy, and we just did a distillery in New West, and the distillery we took down displaced a lot of artists who, again, they were rather upset. And then all of a sudden they were following our page. They were commenting on all our posts. We were getting some of the lumber to the artists, and they were really excited about it. So it's been really fascinating to see how we can spin that into a positive story. The big ugly truth about demolition, which we're really trying to be vocal about now, is the health impacts. And so, sorry. On our average residential job, we have to bring our abatement crew back in about twice to remove more asbestos. And so what that shows us is that every demolition happening in our community still has asbestos in it. And that means it's not only contaminating our air in our communities, it's contaminating our landfills, our recycling facilities. And the only way to really, truly remove all of the asbestos, all the hazardous materials out of these buildings as they come down, is to deconstruct them. And the reason that we uncovered is because we're peeling every layer back. And so we peel back a layer and we find, asbestos tile underneath. Whereas if a machine was coming in there at that point, it's already been signed off on by a qualified professional. From the city's perspective, the permit department, they're under the understanding that it's free of asbestos. The machine comes in and smashes it apart. And that particulate is going up into the air and getting mixed in with the materials. So really, from a health perspective, there's only one way to truly do this safely, and that's to deconstruct. And I know, for me and my family, if there's a house on my street that's being demolished, I'm very concerned about the health of my family as that goes on. So I think this point is really one that I hope is what really breaks deconstruction into the mainstream in a big way, because I'm very concerned as a father of a 1-year-old. Lastly, for just pure impact, the economics. So deconstruction is fantastic for the economy. Now this has at times, watching Victoria just pass policy, we've seen a lot of negative reaction to it. It's been a mix. There's been a lot of positive reaction, but also a lot of negative reaction because people are concerned that we're adding cost to the development process, which it does add cost. But when you're adding $20,000 to a residential project for a building that really is completely fine to renovate. I have a hard time believing that that cost is trickling down to either low-income families or renters. It's really going to the high-income individuals that can afford to tear down a house to build a new custom house. But we are structured. We have our business model in place to try to fight that financial cost. And one area we really want to start lobbying the federal government is we believe there should be a federal subsidy towards owners that are going to deconstruct. So I think that they should get their permits early. And I think that the owner should get a subsidy to do this because it's good for the economy, it's good for the environment, and it's good for the community. And so when we look at how many jobs this transition is going to create, it's inevitable that deconstruction is going to replace demolition. It's just a matter of when is that going to happen. I believe it'll be over the next 10 years. We'll see this across the country and across the US. And as that transition happens, it's going to create roughly 250,000 jobs nationally. That's just looking at the deconstruction service and the reclaimed wood recovery. When you look at all the periphery jobs it's going to create, we don't even know how many that would be in total, but just between transportation, selling the materials, woodworkers, designers, the recycling facilities that'll be expanded or created. So this point in particular is how we can really drive it home with the policymakers. And on an economic level, we're looking at this adding roughly $19 billion a year to the economy. And again, that's just looking at deconstruction as a service and reclaimed wood. That doesn't include all the other activity that comes with it. So it's substantially larger than that. So this is major for our economy and for good, hardworking jobs. There are some regions, two in Canada that have some policy, or one, Vancouver, that has policy in place. And Victoria will have a deconstruction bylaw by next year. So Vancouver introduced their green demo bylaw in 2014, which at first only mandated recycling. And so this is a real misleading policy piece because it actually didn't lead to any deconstruction. It just led to green demolition. So instead of the contractors demolishing and dumping all the materials at the landfill, they had to hit 75% recycling. So they would take all the lumber and they would typically bring it to Cloverdale Fuels or Eco Waste, where it's chipped up and then used as biofuel. So it's hard to call this progress. You have old growth dimensional lumber being chipped up and burnt in an incinerator, and people patting their backs saying that they're doing a green service. So it's still contributing to CO2 emissions, and it's really not putting in place the things that we need. So Vancouver 2 years ago expanded their policy to include deconstruction, mandatory deconstruction on pre-1910 homes, and they're looking at expanding that to pre-1940 homes this year, and we are really pushing them to do it soon. And Victoria just introduced a pretty extensive residential bylaw that'll come into play next year, which is essentially banning residential demolition. So it's very exciting. And then Portland and San Mateo County, which is in the Bay Area, just south of San Francisco, they have just a straight demolition ban as well, which has been extremely successful. I'd say Portland is the most successful, and the community of Portland, basically nothing leaves that city in general. They're so sustainably minded, the population there, that the used market is just so hot. And so that is one worry from policymakers. You know, if we mandate deconstruction, who is going to buy all this material? And there is certainly work that needs to be done there. But when lumber prices are what they are, we have no worry about selling our lumber. And the other materials, that's definitely a work in progress. And then Pittsburgh also just announced that Pittsburgh has a lot of derelict homes and abandoned homes because it's actually a shrinking city. And the city of Pittsburgh just announced that all abandoned homes and all city properties will be deconstructed moving forward. There will be no more demolition, and they hope to influence the rest of the region and the rest of the industry to do the same. So it's exciting times. We have policy coming, and we're working with the province and several other municipalities across the country right now to help guide them towards this, because it has to happen, and it has to happen soon. And so with the new federal targets of 2030, 45% reduction of our carbon emissions, to get even close to that, we literally need to ban demolition like tomorrow. So for our kids, which is the purpose of the evening, there's clearly only one path forward. So you can see a typical landfill versus our lumber yard on the side. And it's very different results from the two different services. And, we tend to tuck away our landfills and bury the materials and hopefully not have anyone see it, but it's pretty nasty. And again, most of that material has value and should never end up in the landfill. Looking forward, how does this, how do we as a construction industry and how do we as a community really move forward to not only see building removal done in a sustainable way, but how does the entire construction industry incorporate these principles so that sustainability is all the way through from start to end, and really it becomes circular, cradle to cradle. So clearly we need to deconstruct or unbuild all of our buildings that are going to come down, and as guide towards as minimal waste as possible. And we also need to start incorporating used building materials. So again, they're very sustainable, very low carbon impact because it's already been incorporated into the initial building that it came from. And we also need to start thinking of our buildings and how we build our buildings differently. And this is the main reason I no longer am building at the moment, because I was building high performance houses, but the way that we were building them, just like everyone else, was still in a single use manner. So we're all well attuned to single-use plastics, but our buildings are built single-use with single-use products. And so we're throwing out buildings because of the way they're designed and built. And that has to change. And that starts from our designers and architects starting to think about, what does that end of life look like? How do we design it for disassembly? How do we design our products on that level? Ever since the 1990s, we started to glue everything together. So buildings from 1990 to today, we can't even deconstruct them because they're all glued together. So we have this big dark period in our construction, which also coincides with a massive construction boom. And we'll never be able to take these buildings apart. And also there's been a big movement towards prefabrication and mass timber. And this is fantastic because both are very conducive to designing for disassembly, and to seeing buildings that have adaptive reuse. And so in North America, on average, we renovate our homes every 10 to 12 years, which makes no sense that we design them and build them in a single-use manner. We literally are going to change them in 10 years. So why would we not have them designed that they can change? So our tagline is, it's not waste, it's just wasted. And again, just showing the difference between the end of a demolition versus the end of a deconstruction, and clear. It's very clear which one we need to move forward with to have a sustainable future.
Yeah, so thank you very much for your presentation. That was fascinating and concerning as well, but really inspiring to see the work that you're doing. I'll open it up to questions now, starting with the one that we have in the chat box, which is, have you dated the age of some of the old wood by Dendrochronology?
No, we haven't. The only thing we've done is on some of the timbers that we've recovered, we've like counted the tree rings, and some of this material is so dense. We've counted like 100 years over 2 inches of material. Just you have 100 different grains or 100 different rings in the lumber. So again, we're seeing that really tight grain old growth material right up into the 1970s. So we haven't dated it. I think I read this week that the oldest dated tree stump in BC is roughly 1900 years. So we don't quite know how old the material is, but old growth is really any tree over 200 years is typically classified as old growth.
Could I add to that? I asked the question, and I used to be involved in heritage planning, and of course, we didn't want to see buildings knocked down, but sometimes you weren't sure how old they were. So there was a process called Dendrochronology. You could hire an expert who, by looking at the rings, they could tell when that tree, how old the tree was, and sort of in working backwards, figure out when the building was built. Anyway, it's fascinating.
Wow.
Process.
Yeah, I'm curious how that would work if you only have a small cross section, like in a single piece of wood.
Be better if you had a big timber, like
Yeah.
I was talking about old barns or cannery buildings and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we had the project that we did in New West that we just finished about a month ago, the distillery from 1929, the beams in it we recovered were 14-inch by 21-inch, so just huge beams. Yeah, we actually haven't counted the rings on it, but it's, yeah, they came from massive trees.
It was good stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we walked into the building with the developer. It was with West Group. And I walked in and looked up, and that was the first thing I saw. And I just turned to them and said, there's no way you can demolish this building. And that's why they called us. They kind of felt the same.
Thank you.
So another question we have is, do you know how other regions in the world are adopting deconstruction? And so you spoke to this a little bit briefly in Canada and the US, but I guess elsewhere around the world.
Yeah, I know that, I mean, the construction industry in different parts of the world is significantly different. So like in Europe, they deconstruct typically, or architectural salvage is what it's usually called. It's pretty much the commonplace, definitely in the UK. That's pretty much commonplace. So I think a lot of the world is, I've been to a conference in Germany and showed them images of demolition, and the carpenters and some of the builders I spoke to were pretty much like shocked at the fact that that's what we do here. So I do think we're pretty far behind, and I contributed to sort of the Wild West that North America was built upon. We were always sort of trying to spread west, and this continent was colonized and developed rather quickly. And I think we always sort of built for short term, and we're still building that way. We only build our buildings with thinking sort of 30 to 50 years, whereas in other parts of the world, in Europe, which I'm more well versed in, they're building for 300 years. So we have a different mentality here, and I think that's part of the issue, that we need to sort of break that mentality and really think longer term. And I know in Asia it's the same. They're thinking a lot longer term. So it is more or less, it's not just a North American problem. We've talked to builders in Australia and New Zealand who have the same issue. Demolition is the norm in those countries as well. But as far as I know, most of the other, at least most of Asia and Europe, is much more geared towards deconstruction and salvage.
And so what do you see as some of the main obstacles to having this practice spread across Canada? You mentioned the subsidies that you're pushing for federally. Has there been any movement on that? And is that one of the key priorities you see?
Well, I haven't started to push that one. I've been more dealing with municipalities and just started to work with the province this year. But that is where we're starting to push things. I think in any sort of major transition in any industry, it's going to be a lot harder if there's not policy that supports it. So looking at another major polluter is, our vehicles, and there's an $8,000 subsidy if you buy an EV. And the reason that subsidy is there is to influence people to move that direction. So deconstruction, we believe, needs to be the same, at least for that transitionary period. It's not that incentive needs to remain for the long term, but to get people over that hump, to get them to start moving this direction, we need to somehow help incentivize it. Because if there's no policy in place and deconstruction just costs 50% more, which is sort of the markets that we're operating in right now, it's really hard. Like we're losing contracts to demolition every day that we bid on, and it's tragic. Like we're seeing the most incredible material, and you can't fully fault someone when their budgets are tight on their build and there's no incentive for them to move this direction. So I do think there needs to be both a time and a financial incentive for this to really become widespread. I would imagine the financial incentive would probably be in place for 5 years as that transitionary period happens, and then you can phase it out, and then deconstruction is the norm. The one thing we like to compare it to when people raise the issue that it's more expensive is when we look at our recycling program, the blue bin program. That costs more than just landfilling everything. And we all pay for that through our taxpayer dollars. Now that we have the blue bin program, if we just took that away because people say we don't want to pay for it anymore, people would, like, you feel guilty if you throw a glass bottle in the garbage. So we've become used to recycling. Well, we need to do the same with our buildings. We need to become accustomed to it. And that's where I think policy can help that transition. And once we're used to it, you can take away that incentive, and that is now the norm.
And so now this ties nicely into a couple of questions we received, which is addressing what can we do to help, like groups like For Our Kids or others on the North Shore.
Write your local politicians. So the District of North Van, as I said, I did a presentation to them. They were very receptive. But what the reception was is they're going to do a report and a study on it. And I have been part of probably 50 studies in the last 5 years. I don't know how many more studies and reports we need and how many consultants we need to pay before we just realize we need to do this and just move it forward. So that's, I mean, I basically have report fatigue. I've done reports. I've done 10 reports for the Vancouver Economic Commission, almost the exact same report year after year. And so I sort of start to pull my hair out going, like, you're spending $100,000 to hire these companies to do these reports. Why don't you put that money towards businesses that are operating this way? Or why don't you put that towards a marketing campaign to show the benefits of this? So yeah, the more that we can come together as a community to ask our politicians to actually take action, or, if your neighbor or someone that is redeveloping, maybe just talk to them about, have they considered deconstructing? Have you looked into the benefits? If you can get over the cost hurdle, which again, that cost hurdle with the donation model is you typically come out ahead. It's just that it's a delayed cost benefit. It's sort of just trying to really promote it. And I'd say that the awareness is a big piece, is how do we make more people aware? And so I look at the last few years, how much the single-use plastic problem has gotten airtime in the media. And it's because it's something we can all really relate to. We see, dead wildlife that's full of plastic. We all go get fast food and have straws and plastic bags at the grocery store. We all see it and touch it. And that became an issue that, it was a 30-year problem brewing. But once we kind of hit that tipping point, we are now starting to see the ban of single-use plastics. Now, single-use plastics are a drop in the bucket in terms of volume for what goes to landfill from construction. And so, how do we have that same sort of visceral reaction to demolition so that we can really, as a community, start to move away from it?
Shifting gears a bit, we have a question regarding, I guess, the fact that some of the wood that gets reclaimed may have mold on it. And so the question is, how can we reuse that wood and still have it be safe for health?
We don't see a lot of it. We did have a project this year that had mold that it didn't have the mold prior to our service. It became moldy from standing in the elements because there was a delay from the Heritage Council and the developer, and there was about a 2-month period where the building was just sitting in the elements, and mold did grow, and we had to do a mold abatement on it. But old buildings, because they didn't have the airtight layers like we have in modern construction, they're actually breathable. We don't see mold in the old buildings usually. There might be mold if there's been a flood, but it's usually on the drywall, and it's less so on the timbers. So we really actually don't see a lot of mold. But if there is mold, we either recycle those pieces, or it would have to go through a process, whether an abatement process or something to clean that wood off. But that's really not much of an issue.
And I guess, as you pointed out, I mean, there's much bigger health concerns related to demolition, particularly around asbestos. Just, could you speak to that a little bit more? That's actually something I was a bit curious and sort of shocked about. So, I mean, obviously when you do a renovation, you're supposed to get properly certified people to come in and take care of that. But so with demolition, what happens typically?
So typically in our region, when you're going to do a project, you have to get hazard material testing done. So someone's going to come in, take samples of, if it's a full house, like a full demolition, they're going to take about 60 samples throughout the building. They try to get a piece of every layer and test it. And there's a lot of issues in this industry right now. You're having testing companies that also own abatement companies. So at times there's been stories where the testing company will basically say, oh, this is all asbestos, so that they can get themselves a massive contract. And so they're either lying about that, or there's times where they want to get the job, so they just do a sort of a half-assed job of removing it. And the company that does the testing is usually also, they're called qualified professional, like QP. So they come back in after the abatement process, they do a walkthrough, and they make sure all the asbestos has been removed. It's usually a visual inspection. And that's where we're seeing, we have only one QP in the entire Lower Mainland that we trust. All the other ones, we have multiple callbacks, because they're so accustomed to demolition. It's not, most of the time it's not malicious, like the first example I use. It's just, you're so used to the machine coming in that if they get 95% of it out, no one knows the difference. And so that's sort of the take from the industry. Because to get 100% of the asbestos, it costs more, it takes more time. You got to peel back layers, you got to dig deeper and try to get every fiber you can. So again, they're sort of balancing the cost and the time versus if you get 95% of it out. From the industry perspective, that's good enough. But from a community's perspective, I don't think it is. It's still contaminants. They're carcinogenic. A very small amount of asbestos particulate can lead to really bad illness. So yeah, it's a tough one. But the QP that we trust, he's got like eagle eyes. He finds it, and we work with very high level abatement companies. It's nothing against them. Even the best abatement company in the world is going to miss some layers because they're not on the surface. It's once you start peeling it back. So the companies we work with, they know that they're going to get called back on our jobs, because when we start, we find it no matter what. So it's something we've engaged WorkSafe about. At the moment, it seems like no one seems to really be that concerned with that small amount, but I mean, I'm concerned. I know that it doesn't take a lot to get sick.
So I see we are running up against the clock. I just want to check in with Lorna and Celine.
I think we can take another couple questions. I'll do a very, very quick wrap up. This is extremely interesting, and we have a lot more questions. So if we can just take a couple more minutes to address some more, this would be awesome. Thank you, Josh.
So going back up the list a little bit, someone was wondering about, did I hear you correctly that modern energy efficient or passive buildings are not amenable to recycling? And they're asking whether deconstruction is at odds with these energy efficient buildings.
It doesn't have to be. So it depends on how it's built. So high performance homes or high performance buildings, they do not tell you how to build it. Well, they do in the layers. So passive house, for instance, you have to have a certain amount of insulation. You have to do a blower door test, see how airtight your building is. So there's ways that you have to build to hit the standard, but they don't say that you can't glue your subfloors and you can't glue your flooring down. They don't tell you the microscopic details of how you build it. And as North America, 98% of our construction is on-site construction at the moment, versus Europe, which is less than 20% is on-site construction. Almost all buildings in Europe are prefabricated. And so prefabrication, modular construction is really conducive to deconstruction because it's built in components so that it can be taken apart. The site construction that we see particularly in residential, it's not built that way. It's just layer by layer, stacking layers together, never with the thought of how it's going to come apart. And high performance is being built in the same way. You are seeing a transition now. The last few years is really encouraging. And as depressing as some of this information is, I do want to say that I'm very optimistic for the future and the future of construction. And Vancouver is actually one of the most innovative spaces for construction in the world at the moment. There is so much happening here in our industry, which is really exciting and really encouraging. And you are seeing a transition, particularly in BC, towards prefabrication. You're starting to hear designers and architects talk about deconstruction, designing for disassembly. So this is starting to become part of the vernacular. And yeah, I am encouraged that the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a massive revolution in construction that will be designed for this disassembly that I'm talking about. But yeah, at the moment, even the high performance homes are not built that way. And it's not that they're worse than non-high performing homes. It's just they're sort of built in the same way. And it's particularly in the finishes.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any more super fast questions, so maybe I'll hand it off now and we can end on that relatively high note.
Yes.
Thank you again. That was.
I do want to throw in a fast question because that might be more closer to home. Do you also come in for small deconstructions?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, so we'll do anything from a single bathroom renovation to a 4-story commercial building. And everything in between. So yeah, we come in, we'll deconstruct a deck or a fence. Yeah, if there's value, then we'll try to pull it out of that project. So yeah, we're not just full buildings, we do renovations as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. This was fascinating, and I think we could go another half hour, at least easily, but to be very mindful of everyone's time, your time, and all our attendees, I'm going to do a wrap up here. So thank you again for this amazing, really eye-opening presentation and discussion. Much appreciated. We will send out the recording to the participant after the call, so feel free to sign up, reply by email if you want to become more involved. We have 2 sessions I want to highlight in June. One is June 8th. We have Karen Story, senior engineer from Metro Vancouver, who's going to tell us about waste management. So can have a bit of a linkage here. And then on June 22nd, we actually have 2 sessions in June because it's June is Ocean Month. We also have another session we're very lucky to have Alison Wood of Ocean Ambassadors Canada joining us. So I'm going to wrap up there. If you want to learn more, go to our website and click the I'm in to get our newsletters or reply to the email you'll get. And I wish everyone a good night. And thank you again, Adam, for the amazing presentation.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Thanks,
Thanks, Adam.
everyone.